Are we saying that the concept itself was flawed, or are we talking about the way in which we implemented it? Let's use concurrency, one of the most important features of the Act, to illustrate the point. You know, the concurrency concept is complex in some ways. Yes, it involves making sure that the infrastructure is in place when you issue development orders. It entails mathematical calculations to make sure that the necessary capacity is there, whether we're talking about roads or schools or some other infrastructure. But you know, it contemplates that government would fund infrastructure. It contemplated that government on the state or local levels would provide the money to make concurrency work. I don't think that it was the intent of the Act to shut down the state, stop development, shut up all development orders by failing to fund it. It envisioned that government would fulfill its obligation to come up with financing systems to make the concurrency system work. So when we say, if we do, that concurrency is a failure, are we saying that concurrency was a bad concept? Or are we talking about the way in which we have or have not implemented it? I think it's very important to keep that in mind. I think it's important to look at the Act as it was written in 1985 and ask the question, well, did this Act, although admittedly ambitious in scope and design, in fact a very visionary piece of legislation, did it nevertheless have some gaps in it? Did it address all of the things that you really need to address if you're going to do an effective job of trying to manage growth in a state like Florida, where growth is a constant, everyday phenomenon? Most recently, I think we had 800 people moving into the state every day, as opposed to the 1,000 or 900 we've had in the past. But did that Act really address everything that you would need to address to effectively deal with growth? Does it deal with things like annexation? No. Annexation completely removed from the process. This Act doesn't touch annexation. Does it deal with things like service areas, the competition between private and public sector service providers, cities and counties who are in frequent competition? No. Really doesn't get a handle on that, and doesn't require the Public Service Commission to ensure that when it approves utility franchises, that it is in fact consistent with the local comprehensive plan. It stops short of that. So we need to ask ourselves, again, when we conclude that growth management has not accomplished its objectives or that it's been a failure, to recognize that that was the first step. It wasn't supposed to be the end of the process. It was to lay a foundation that could be built upon. And therefore, we should also ask, over the last 20 years, what has the state done to fill in any of those gaps or loopholes? Before we conclude that a growth management system can't work, we ought to ask the question, well, have we improved on it? Have we consistently and constantly evaluated and reevaluated it, identified problems and loopholes, and amended the Act to address those? Occasionally we've done that. More often than not, we simply have not moved beyond the 1985 vision and confronted some of the really difficult problems that remain that really are not addressed by or touched by our growth management system. We ought to ask, what has the state done to implement the vision embodied in the 1985 Act? You know, it doesn't deal with all governmental programs. It really doesn't rope in the state itself. We need to ask the question, has the state itself aligned all of its programs, its capital improvement programs, its fiscal policies, its expenditures to support the system that was supposed to be created by the 1985 Act? We frequently hear people say, well, the Growth Management Act has failed to stop urban sprawl. We still have urban sprawl just like we did before. Well, urban sprawl is not a simple phenomenon. In fact, some people think they like urban sprawl. You know, I mean, there's great controversy over this thing about land development patterns. But if the state was firmly committed to the policy that's embodied in our 1985 Growth Management Act to discourage sprawl, has the state itself taken the next step to align all of its other programs in support of that policy? Again, I think we need to do that before we make conclusions that the concepts embodied in the 1985 Growth Management Act are a failure or have not worked well. Finally, I think we need to ask another question. Growth management involves both policy and process. The 1985 created new processes for dealing with growth. It also, to a certain extent, established new substantive policies, which may be found in the State Comprehensive Plan or in the Local Government Planning Act itself. So when we start to evaluate the Act, I think we need to distinguish between policy and process. It may be that we've created a great process or a very effective process, but been far short of the mark with regard to policy. How well has the process worked? How well has the policy worked? The Growth Management Act, like the very concept of growth management itself, is a complicated thing. It's not simple. It is complex. And so we need to keep all of these factors in mind. We need to keep in mind the fact that the Act has been an evolutionary thing. It's undergone a lot of change, both in terms of the text of the Act and in the way we've implemented it over the last 20 years. And if we bring those historical perspectives to bear on the Act and our growth management process, I think we can learn from that and we can make more astute judgments about this Act and this process and what we need to do to improve upon it.
Thank you, Tom. The next presenter is an author of one of the chapters in the book, Dr. Efraim Ben-Zadok, who is born at Atlantic University, the College of Public Affairs. He's the first of several faculty members who will be participating on the panel. The others, as we introduce them, will be responding and commenting on other chapters of the book. For those of you who aren't familiar, the college is located here, primarily in this higher education center building and across the street at the Askew Tower. It has the schools of architecture, urban public affairs, urban regional planning, public administration, social work, and criminal justice. It's a great resource that if you're not familiar with it, we've got a great new website that you can take a look at. I would want to say that if it weren't for the initiative of Efraim and coming to me and others at college and talking about the importance of having an event like this, we saw the ability to couple it with our anniversary, and he has been the person that has made sure that this panel came together. I certainly appreciate his interest, his ongoing interest. He's written a lot, scholarly articles on growth management, and I'm sure in the future he'll be providing us more guidance. Please welcome Efraim.
Thank you for coming to our college. In this college, we already solved all the growth management problems. And we have seat for all of you, right here. You can come forward. Okay, this is after you solve the parking lot growth management problem.